A proliferation of threats made ensuring survivability more difficult. The huge battleships of the Second World War could not survive concerted air and submarine attack, and could not punch back at sufficient range to justify their main armament. Except for aircraft carriers, where lethality still increased with size, naval architecture took a turn for the petite. The chief surface ships of the U.S. Navy, USN, today displace less than a quarter that of the battleships of World War II. Post-WEI ships also, broadly speaking, discarded the idea of armor as a means of ensuring survivability. There remains considerable debate as to how traditional battleship belt-side armor could resist cruise missiles. Cruise missiles generally have less penetrating power than the largest naval artillery, although they have other advantages. Deck armor proved a more serious problem, and the demands of ensuring survivability from bombs, pop-up cruise missiles, and, more recently, ballistic missiles quickly outpaced the improved lethality of a large, heavily armored ship. And perhaps most importantly, no one figured out how to eliminate, as opposed to ameliorate, the problem of underwater attack. Torpedoes continued to pose a lethal threat to even the most heavily armored of warships. Which isn't to say that people haven't tried. Several navies have played with the idea of large surface warships since the end of World War II. The Royal Navy considered redesigning and completing at least one member of the Lion class, abandoned in 1939. Studies eventually determined that the level of deck armor necessary to protect the ships from bombs would prove prohibitive. The Soviets maintained plans to build traditional gun-toting battleships into the 1950s, when the death of Stalin ended such a fantasy. France completed Jeanne Bart in 1952, and kept her in partial commission into the 1960s as a training and accommodation ship. A new wave began in the 1970s, when the Soviet Union started construction on the Kirov-class heavy missile cruisers, which quickly took on the name battle cruisers. The USN responded, in part, with the refurbishment of the four Iowa-class battleships, which acquired long-range missiles but remained in service for only a few years. More recently, Russia, the United States, and China have all considered the construction of large surface warships. The Russians periodically promise to build new Kirovs, a claim to take as seriously as the suggestion that Russia will build new Tu-160 strategic bombers. One of the proposals for the CGX program involved a nuclear-powered warship approaching 25,000 tons. The media has treated the Chinese Type 055 cruisers as a similar super warship, but reports now indicate that the ship will displace around 12,000–14,000 tons, somewhat smaller than the US Zumwalt-class destroyer. Big ships still have some lethality advantages. For example, bigger ships can carry larger magazines of missiles, which they can use for both offensive and defensive purposes. Advances in gun technology, such as the 155mm advanced gun system to be mounted on the Zumwalt-class destroyer, mean that large naval artillery can strike farther and more accurately than ever before. But the most important advances may come in survivability. The biggest reason to build big ships may be the promise of electricity generation. The most interesting innovations in naval technology involve sensors, unmanned technology, lasers, and railguns, most of which are power-intensive. Larger ships can generate more power, increasing not only their lethality, railguns, sensors, but also their survivability, anti-missile lasers, defensive sensor technologies, close defense systems. The missile magazines that large ships can carry allow them to draw together these elements and lethality and survivability better than their smaller counterparts. What about a true successor to the classic battleship, designed to both deal out and absorb punishment? Advances in materials design have certainly increased the ability of other military systems, most notably the tank, to survive punishment, and a serious effort to create an armored ship would undoubtedly result in a well-protected vessel. The problem is that passive systems need to protect a ship from a wide range of different attacks, including cruise missiles, torpedoes, ballistic missiles, and long-range guns. Keeping